I want to know, why is it every time Bermuda has a piece of property for sale, why is it that government gives them tax breaks? That's money after you've sold the property. Why can't you let them pay the tax? That's money in your pocket and a break from us. You taxing us every time.
Testing, testing.
That's what I would like to know. Why do you have to always give tax breaks? I understand some, like the hotels, but why is it when you get millionaires or billionaires come here, buy pieces of property for $10.5 million, and then you don't charge them no taxes?
I think that, if I can answer that question, we don't have a system where people pay no taxes. We've introduced a situation where they have tax breaks, where we have reduced their taxes. And if you can let me finish, I'll explain. I think as many of you know, and many of you in this room are homeowners, and you have seen the value of your property decline very significantly over the past 6 or 7 years. The decline in property values is devastating to our economy. What happens is that banks won't lend you any money to buy a house because the banks are afraid they're going to lose their shirts because the property value is going to go down. Our actions that we took to encourage those millionaires that the lady mentioned to buy property in Bermuda is to stop the decline in the value of Bermudian properties. And that's the reason that we're doing that. And I can tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, it's starting to work.
Is there another question? Right over here.
Yes. Can I just hold the mic? Let me hold the mic, please. Yes, good evening.
Yes, sir.
You know, what's happening here tonight, because you guys came in government in power 2 years ago and you talked about accountability, transparency, and good governance. The people are riled up tonight because they don't see any of that. Number one. Now, on that presentation that you presented earlier, you talked about growing revenue. It's actually was up there, but there's no ideas on growing revenue. Everything is about the sales commission is about cuts, 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 and more cuts. The people are fed up. We're tired of hearing about cuts. So let me share something about growing revenue. Because somehow your consultants, they all need to go. Because you don't need to go to the grassroots people. The grassroots people like us, it seems like we have more ideas about growing the economy than your consultants, who you are paying billions of dollars out to.
Well,
has the government...
Oh, you're not finished.
Hang on.
Okay.
Last year you came and you borrowed approximately $800 million for somehow to go back into the kitty to service debt and whatever products that we need to run the island. What about taking some portion of that and possibly we could acquire land overseas, hectares of land that we're able to farm and produce. We could now feed our people, and then we could consider of not just sustaining us, but we can consider of producing and exporting from this land to feed other countries. Number one, Bermuda is surrounded by ocean. What about fisheries? Why is the Taiwanese, Japanese trailers here all year round? Why can't we do it? And guess what? If our people don't seem to be equipped to do it, we can manage it. And today's technologies, guess what? These boats are equipped to produce, to produce and to transport straight from the ships. That's what technology does. 3, I've heard conversations in the last couple of years, one group, the Blue Halo, another group, Seabed Mining. Why doesn't government create an atmosphere that these two groups can come and dialogue and discuss the pros and cons? There's no debate. I yet have seen anything in your presentation to talk about the growing the revenue. It's about cuts, cuts, cuts. We can't just depend on IB. If they get up and leave tomorrow, where does that leave us?
Okay, can I address those, please? Those are good points. Those are good points. I think I want to start from the end first. Your point about relying on international business to grow the economy is 100% right. That's the reason that we have spent a great deal of time, effort, and money to rejuvenate tourism, to encourage tourism development, new hotels, which will provide not only jobs for construction, which are fairly short-term jobs, but also long-term jobs for people working in our hotel sector. We have to get tourism back if we're going to grow this economy. There's no question about that. So the gentleman was correct. Insofar as those other ideas that he was talking about, they are all great entrepreneurial ideas. They're not ideas for the government to do, because the government doesn't have any money for that. So if we have entrepreneurs who want to do long line fishing, more power to you. As for buying land overseas, I can tell you something, that $800 million that we borrowed is being used up just to crank the handle of government, and there's nothing left over.
Good evening. I would like to know what happened to the furlough money that was taken from all government workers, because we haven't had any documentation to say what that money was spent on. And seems to be a conflict between the Premier and you, Mr. Minister, regarding the $35 million. What are you going to do about that? Because you can go, why you can't get that back? And the other thing I have is the
What 35 million?
Beg your pardon?
What 35 million? Huh?
The $35 million that your minister said that he's going to write off, and you said something different.
Okay. At least now I know what you're talking about. Now I know what you're talking about.
My next question is...
Can I answer your questions one at a time? Because, my memory is good, but it's short. As far as that 35 million is concerned, I can tell you that there was no disagreement between myself and Premier Dunkley. It was a disagreement that was manufactured by the Royal Gazette. There was no difference between us, right? So let me reiterate. I just want to finish off that question, because I want to assure everybody here, right? I want to assure everybody here is our taxpayers. Everybody here is a taxpayer. I can assure you, madam, that anybody who owes money to the government of Bermuda, that money will not be written off, right? We will still have them on our books and take measures to collect that money.
So did you ask for a retraction from the daily, did you ask for a retraction from what you said? You said that was a made-up, fabricated something.
Well, the headline definitely was, they have these headlines that are wrong, and then the stories, right.
Question number 3. We have government buildings where we wouldn't have to pay rent, and you've moved some departments out of those buildings and into businesses where other people's businesses, so that private businesses, so that now we have to pay rent on that. Why can't we keep as many government offices as possible in those buildings instead of moving them?
Well, I think we should.
So why did you move them then?
And we just have to look into that. I can tell you one thing, though. I'll tell you one thing, that the public service is much bigger than the number of buildings that we have, right? Much, much bigger. So we will have to rent no matter what.
Okay, my last question. You've been taking our money and putting it in private businesses, particularly the Bermuda Tourism Authority, and I don't see why, and I'm sure most people here don't understand why you can tell us that you're taking our money, putting it in a private something, and then you don't explain to us what this money is being used for and how it's being spent.
That is a good comment, and I have it on good authority from my colleague, Minister of Tourism, that all expenditures and financial statements from the Tourism Authority will be revealed as they become available. Annually. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Minister, and good evening to everyone here. I have two questions. Bear with me.
Sure.
It appears the Efficiency and Reform Authority is making the decisions on government reform on behalf of the Cabinet. How can a non-elected body have so much power, especially since ministers, the executive, are elected by the people for the people, a basic tenet of the Constitution, along with the two other branches of government, i.e. the legislation and the judiciary? That's my first question.
Well, I'll answer that question now. I'll answer it forthrightly. The assumption of that question is not correct, because the Efficiency and Reform Authority will not be making decisions. The decisions will, I say this categorically, I want everybody to understand this. The decisions will be made by the Cabinet of Bermuda, which is the executive branch of the people that were elected in 2012. So the decisions will be made in the right place by the executive branch of government. They will not be made by that authority. That authority has advisory, is to put there to have an advisory role and an analytical role, not an executive role. Okay. Whoever said that, I know you're hearing it around and trying to mislead you because it's not true.
Sorry. So they won't be making decisions, but they'll be making recommendations.
That's correct.
And so you may take those recommendations under consideration.
That's correct. Just like SAGE recommended things that we decided not to do, same thing applies, right?
So it's these non-elective people will be making recommendations to Cabinet, and Cabinet will be approving their recommendations.
Or not.
Or not. Okay, my second question. What regulations or controls are in place with banks?
With banks?
Yes.
Banks have the Banking and Deposit Company Act, that's a legislation, and banks are regulated by the Bermuda Monetary Authority to make sure that they have adequate capital to have people's money safe. So they are well regulated by the BMA. Next.
Good afternoon. In your presentation, you indicated that you would be hiring outside persons to negotiate on behalf of the government with the unions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me why that decision was made? Because I believe negotiations is a two-way street. It involves unions and the other party.
That's
so
correct.
we already have civil servants who normally conduct negotiations, and they already paid a salary. So now, from what has been said, you're going to pay others. When we don't have money, you're going to pay others to conduct negotiations that, again, the resolutions lie with two parties. That doesn't mean that the outside party can bring about resolution.
Well, insofar as resolution is concerned, we'll have to see. However, let me say this, that the reason that we're going down this road, because if, and in the past, you had negotiations being done by civil servants on one side of the table and civil servants on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
And the civil servants that were representing the Minister of Finance and the Premier basically had a conflict of interest, right? And so what the recommendation there is to have people who don't have a conflict of interest represent the Finance Minister and the government and the Premier. So that's why that recommendation was done.
It is my understanding that...
Can we hear the young lady, please?
It is my understanding that when decisions were close to resolution, the civil servants went back to the cabinet to report, and they dictated what was going to be agreed upon. They had the final say.
Well, the cabinet always has the final say.
Right, but however, you will be paying 3 persons, and already we said we do not have any money to afford to pay. You'll be asking for cuts and furlough days. My other question, my other comment, concern, question, you indicated that your senior civil servants may be going on contract. Yes?
That's one of the recommendations of SAGE.
Right.
Yes.
But you also, and I believe it was for what? Why? What was the reason for them going on contract? Can you tell us?
Well, we are trying to, what SAGE recommended and what the government agrees with in principle is that the system that we have in government today doesn't work properly insofar as the flow of accountability from the top to the bottom. It has nothing to do with the individuals, it's the system, right? And what SAGE recommended is that the top body in the civil service is the Public Service Commission. But the Public Service Commission does not have the tools and powers to conduct itself like a board of directors would in a company. So in a company, a board of directors basically is the senior arbiter of things. In government, once it gets past senior civil servants, the system kind of breaks down when it comes to the Public Service Commission. And that is why we are trying to make the whole thing more accountable and to, we talked about accountability. The system does not encourage accountability. And so one of the strongest recommendations of SAGE was this accountability question. And accountability has to start at the top, at the Public Service Commission.
It relates to that question. It relates to that question. Again, with accountability, and on the same back of this, you said that you declined monitoring for government ministers. Yes? One of the recommendations.
We declined joint select committees to monitor ministries. Yeah.
Right. So on one hand, you want to regulate the civil service to say for accountability, but who's holding our ministers accountable?
Believe me. Believe me, Galinda, every time we go up that hill in the House of Assembly, we are held accountable in the most fierce way. In the most fierce way. If any of you folks who work for government were spoken to the way we get spoken to in Parliament, you'd be going crazy. Right? So we're held accountable.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, ma'am.
You talk about outsourcing. So with outsourcing, jobs are lost. And when jobs are lost, people can't pay their mortgage, and your children can't be fed, school fees can't be paid. Do you have something in place to assist these people when they lose their jobs, when the banks close their mortgages? Is government going to go to the banks and say, hey, these people lose their jobs, can you do something? We need to know and see what you have in writing, a plan for the people, the government people, if they should lose their jobs, and if they can't pay their mortgages, what are you going to do to assist us? Do you have money to assist us? Have you put something aside? Because if you do what you're going to do, this is going to happen. So I really don't, listen, I really don't think that you all have, I understand what you're trying to do, but you haven't sat down and really thought about the impact that this is going to have on we government workers. This is serious. You can't just play with our money like this. Yes, you're in debt, but I honestly feel it's not my fault that you're in debt. If government didn't put a hold on their purse strings like they should have, it's not our fault. It's not our fault. We have sacrificed so much already, and I think it's really unfair for you to expect us to just give up our money like that. We budget every month for stuff, and now you're asking us to budget some more? It's unfair. Okay. So what I'm saying,
I'd like to answer your question.
What I'm saying and what I'm suggesting is that you find some other revenue and some other way to get the money back that you need to get back. Because taking from us, taking, like the gentleman said, it's not fair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. First of all, I think the logical progression that young lady gave about if you outsource, people will necessarily lose their jobs is not correct. It's just not correct. Let me give you, and we have a real live example. We have two live examples. We outsourced tourism. Nobody lost their job, right? Nobody lost their job. Not one person lost their job. So the assumption that if we outsource something, people are going to lose their jobs is just not a correct assumption. Now, I agree entirely with the young lady who said that the fact that government's finances are in the shambles is not her fault. I agree with that, right? It's not. But we have a situation that if it is not corrected, the damage will be even worse. So we've got to find a way to reduce the expense profile of government with the least fallout particularly on civil servants as possible. But I want to come back to the idea and the notion of increasing revenues. There's two things that are very important to point out. And the first thing is that we are working day and night trying to stimulate and get people to get this economy moving. I tell you, we're working day and night to do that. And that will help increase government revenues. But some people have the notion that if we only increase taxes on rich people, it would solve all of our problems. But I want to disabuse you of that idea. I want to disabuse you of that idea. In the first place, never in the history of man have tax rates been increased and an economy grow. Tax increases always cause the economy to decline. So it's one of those inconvenient truths. So if we increase tax rates, the economy will decline and the economy will actually lose more jobs. So we can't increase taxes. We have to find other ways to grow the economy, and that's what we're doing. So I understand where people are impatient